Welcome back to a special summer edition of the Monmouth Basketball Hawks Nest podcast. Hope everybody had a great summer. Hope everybody's healthy out there, enjoying your time in the sunshine. We have a special podcast tonight. It's not our normal game reactions. It's a draft. We thought something fun to do over the summer, and we meant to do it a long time ago, but we got kind of busy. Everybody's on vacation in different weeks, and we couldn't get together. But Mark and Mike and I did a draft, and we're going to share those results. We have every player on our list from the King Rice era. So that is the last 11 years. It includes current players, former players, players from 10 years ago. You'll see a lot of familiar names, a little blast from the past. We do not have anybody pre-King Rice. So the Giraldo fans out there, the Blackwell fans, anybody from the early 2000s, I'm sorry. I don't go back that far, and Mike doesn't either. So Mark's the only one that has a little bit of experience there. And his is still a little bit limited. So we went with what we know. We did a 3-team draft with 12 players per team. And basically how this worked is, don't look at this as the ranking of how we rank guys. It's building a team. So if you think of a fantasy football draft, you might have to draft an average running back over Patrick Mahomes. It doesn't mean necessarily we think he's a better player, but we're building a basketball team to beat each other. So think of it that way when you're going through it. I'm hoping a lot of fans and players will chime in and either tell us that was awesome or we're out of our friggin' minds for picking that guy there and sleeping on that guy. That's the fun of this, and that's what we're looking forward to. So I'll introduce Mark and Mike. So Mark, what's going on?
How's it going? Quickly today, threw up a Facebook poll. 32% of you who voted for that you would take Micah Seaborn if you had the first overall pick. 25% came in with Dion Hammond and 17% with George Pappas. Also receiving votes, Shavar Reynolds, Walker Miller, Jelon Hornbeek, Deion Jones, Malik Martin, Sam Chapu, and Andrew Red Nicholas. So when you take Justin Robinson off the draft board, all of a sudden it becomes quite a debate on who should go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and all the way down, which, we went back and forth when we had originally had this idea. And when it was just Ryan and I in the beginning, I was like, whoever gets Robinson first, like the next person needs to have 3 draft picks in a row or something. Equate it. I had said today, Justin Robinson is the GOAT of Monmouth basketball, and he's almost like a cheat code in this type of draft, and that it would make it unfair. So Justin's out of it, but you know what? He could chime in with where we took his buddies, what we did wrong, who was overselected, underselected. Can't wait to hear from the fans' reaction. Can't wait to hear from former players' reaction. And I might be a little biased, but I think my team's the best.
we'll let the fans decide that. We'll put a poll up on the draft. All right, Mike, what's going on?
Not much, guys. We're putting a ball in another great summer here. Really excited to get going with another season of Monmouth sports. Not just Monmouth basketball, Monmouth football too. I know this is a Monmouth basketball podcast, and we have a lot of fun doing it, and looking forward to it. And this really was a great time that Ryan and Mark and I had putting together this draft, thinking about all the great King Rice teams we've had several different cores now that have turned over. I think we're going on 11, 12 years of the King Rice tenure.
This is 12.
Yeah, 12 years, right? So really three basically full graduating classes, and we really got to go through a couple eras within eras of the King Rice tenure at Monmouth. So this was a great time. We had a lot of fun doing this. We were texting back and forth as we were making our picks.
Yeah, I gotta say, there's cursing in that chat. Mark sniped me a few times. Mike got me once or twice on a couple of guys, and I definitely had some swears in that group chat. Guys kept getting taken right before me, but that's the way it goes in the draft sometimes. If anybody's ever drafted a team before. So I guess we'll start it up. We kind of went in last name alphabetical order. So we started with Mike was the number 1 pick, and then Mark, and then 3rd pick. Draft. So for those of you not familiar, the first person picks, second person picks, third person picks, and then it goes in the reverse order. So I would get the 4th pick, Mark gets the 5th, Mike gets the 6th, and we snake it back around and so on. So let's get started. Mike, you have the first overall pick. Who did you take and why'd you take him?
All right, so I was on the clock, and after I lost several appeals to take Justin Robinson with the first overall pick, I thought about this from the standpoint of who is the most talented recruit in the King Rice era from a ranking standpoint, and we have Jalon Hornby, a four-star recruit. Those of you remember, he was a transfer from Oklahoma, came over as part of that first core of that Justin Robinson team that really broke out. And he was an outstanding player. We could shoot from anywhere on the floor. It was a nightmare for teams that keyed in on Justin. You could really score in any number of ways, made everything look ridiculously easy. And in this draft, he was the player I wanted to build around. With that in mind, I had one other that I was going back and forth between, and my strategy was to see if Mark and Ryan would pass up on this guy, and I would get him on the way back. But with the first overall pick, took Jalon Hornby.
All right, Mark, who do you got? Number 2.
So my mindset was I actually looked at the players that King Rice had, put them into positional tiers. Anyone who tells you, well, there's positionless basketball now, that's kind of BS, because if you have a dominant big man and no one else has a big man that can compete with that big man, you are set up for success. So, I'm dating myself here, but thinking back to, Shaquille O'Neal and dominating the NBA, I went with the big man, Walker Miller, as my center. Figured that the gap between him and all the other bigs, with all due respect to Chris Brady and all the way down, but all the other natural centers, thought Walker Miller had the biggest gap. So I started him as the centerpiece of my team.
So what Mark did there was, if you're a fantasy football person, he took the tight end Travis Kelce as his first pick. So he dominated the tight end position, and then he goes from there. He took the best guy at a tier that's not as strong, because let's face it, Monmouth has always been a very guard-oriented team the last 11 years and even before that, and there haven't been that many dominant big guys come through. And when you had Walker Miller, who was kind of like a unicorn at Monmouth for the way he played basketball underneath the basket and shot threes, North Carolina guy, I definitely get where Mark was going there, and I understood that one. I had the 3rd and 4th pick at the turn. I got my number 1 guy 3rd, so I was thrilled he fell to me. I had Micah Seaborn at number 3. To me, he was the most talented guy besides Justin in this era. He shot the 3. He was so creative around the basket. Ridiculous finishes, reverse, going across the basket, across his body. He did so many things well for this team. And had he not gotten injured at the end of his junior season, we probably would have been in the tournament, no fault to him. And if he hadn't been hurt his senior year, I think he would have been much higher up on the Monmouth record books for points. And then obviously he left his last year, which was very unfortunate for us. But Micah was so talented, and I had to start my team with him. My second pick, number 4 overall, was Deion Jones. And I think a lot of people on Twitter were giving him some respect. Deion was kind of everything for this team. He came from Towson as a transfer after a couple of years. He came right when the team was starting to peak up a little bit, and then he was here for that first awesome season they had, Robinson's junior year. But Deion did everything. He was a 6'5", 6'6", kind of shooting guard, small forward, but he played a lot bigger than that. He shot the 3. He was either first or second on the team in rebounds. Great defensive player. I mean, this guy just did everything he could have asked for. He pulled up, hit 12, 15, 18 footers. He did a little bit of everything. So I figured if I have Micah shooting on the outside and creating in the middle, and I have Deion hanging out, busting guys down low, shooting a 3 here and there, that's a pretty high power start to my lineup there. So Mark, you are back with number 5th pick. So who are you adding to Walker?
Yeah, so I just have to say, Hornbeak, when you're looking for a two-way player, like Mike said, he could do so much on both ends. And then Seaborn, probably arguably one of the best scorers that wasn't Justin Robinson. And then Deion Jones, probably the most versatile Monmouth Hawk that we've seen, with the fact that he came in and he was a big time scorer and a wing, and then transitioned into that undersized 4-man role, and deferred to some of those young guys when they started to take that big next step. I figured I got Walker Miller, and then I'm not going to lie, one of the guys I was eyeing was Deion Jones, because I figured that front line would be unstoppable. But when Deion went, I said, well, can't have Justin Robinson, but I'm going to take the second best point guard that we've had under King Rice, and that's Shavar Reynolds. And when you're talking about Shavar Reynolds, you're talking about, and I started to say, oh my gosh, everyone's going to say I have recency bias with, the two stud, 5th-year guys from the most recent team. But when you talk about Shavar, you talk about a guy who can score it anytime down the floor. You talk about a guy who has a confidence and a swagger that the other guys will follow in line. And he can also pick up and defend anybody, any backcourt from, a 1 or a 2. Really, really pumped to have, again, I think that there were a lot of good wings and a lot of good guards, but I thought that there was center, there was a clear number 1 and a gap, and point guard, there was a clear number 1 and a gap. So very pumped to have my top-rated center and top-rated point guard in the draft starting out my team.
All right, Mike. So who are you adding to Jelon at the turn to get 2 picks right here? Who'd you take?
So at this point, right, I'm licking my chops because that guy I was talking about that I was between 1 and 2 picking with the first overall pick, he's still on the board. And that guy is Ray Salnave, one of my favorites. This is my personal bias here, but the steal of the draft. Okay. He's my favorite go-to guard that I had available. Right. The ball runs through him, no fear whatsoever, an alpha, right? Saw him make so many clutch game winners for Monmouth. He was so reliable for those teams. Really, you put the ball in his hands, he's gonna make a play, whether that's crossing someone up, whether that's getting to the rim, whether that's a step back, threes. He was incredible. That season that ended with the pandemic pause, I'm convinced that if we had a MAC tournament, the way that regular season ended and the way it was shaping up with the draw, we were looking at possibly getting Siena on a rematch that tournament. I'm convinced that if we had that tournament that's ending with a Ray Salnave walk-off buzzer beater and headed back to the NCAA tournament. So that's my guy, right? So building this roster, Ray Salnave was my point guard now at this stage. And now I'm looking at building out some of that front court, and I'm going with Brees Kafani. Okay. Brees Kafani was a grad transfer from Providence when the King Rice teams really started making a run at these high majors and started playing more physical. He was the guy that came in and was cleaning the glass and scoring a lot inside. A lot of fans may remember at the start of that time, they were getting close against teams like Maryland, SMU, West Virginia. They were getting some near misses. A lot of, I know Ryan loves to say a lot of bad whistles in some of those games that could have cost us even more high major wins. But Brees Kafani was one of those guys that was extremely physical, and he really embodied the team's belief that they could beat those teams. And I think we eventually saw that manifest in some of those wins that came in the next couple of seasons. But as I'm building out this roster and I'm thinking about my attempt to create the best team in terms of how players would play together in their skill sets, I think Brees Kafani makes a good option here.
All right, so Mike goes guard, center. I don't think Ray is going to be very happy with us that he fell to 6. If anybody knows Ray, I think he probably thought he was going to be 1, 2, or 3 on that list. But Mike gets him at 6, gets his big guy in Kafani. Mark, you went center guard. Who are you going with at number 8?
So I started looking at my roster here, and I'm not going to lie. When I was looking at my draft board, one of the guys I was hoping would slip to me was Ray. So Ray wasn't there, but I had 2 guys in mind. And it's kind of interesting because there were 2 guys that were Batman and Robin on any night, and that's Deion Hammond. So I throw Deion Hammond on the wing, Walker Miller at center, Shavar Reynolds at point guard. Deion Hammond hit 272 threes in his career. He had the highest single season point per game average of anyone not named Justin Robinson in a Monmouth uniform under King Rice. Dion Hammond never played with a dominant big like Walker Miller or a playmaking point guard like Shavar Reynolds. So playing through Walker in the low post with Shavar Reynolds with his playmaking and Dion Hammond perched on that perimeter, ready to let it fly, we're almost unstoppable 3 guys in.
All right, we'll see about that. He's got passing, he's got shooting, he's got a big guy. He's definitely got height. He's definitely got talent right now. So I'm going at the turn here with number 9 and number 10. At 9, I'm taking who I think is the most underrated player in the era that we're talking about is Austin Tillman at guard. This guy came in his freshman year, had a football scholarship for Division I, and chose to play basketball instead, but he looked like a running back. He had a rough freshman year. He didn't get a ton of time, but when he was out there, he definitely struggled a little bit. But this is a kid that got infinitely better the more he played. You know, he hit that ridiculous 3-court shot that went on ESPN. He got so much tougher. He's bullying guys in the lane. He's playing some small forward. He's playing in the paint sometimes. He became such a great point guard. He wasn't just a bully that could just knock into guys anymore. He really understood how to play the game, find guys that were open. He started hitting some threes at the end, but he became a really good guard. I don't remember if he made third team all conference. If he didn't, he was in the conversation that year, but he went from like a third string point guard that didn't look great to one of the best players in the MAC conference. And I think his toughness and his skill set, which apparently he's scoring 35 points a game overseas right now. He's killing everybody. Every time I see Twitter and Austin Tillman, he's scoring 35, 40 on some poor team and overseas. So he seems to be carving out a great career for himself. And I think I'd be very happy to have him as my point guard on this team. And then at number 10, I had to go big. Mark and Mike each got their big guy, so I had to get mine, which is Chris Brady. It took him a couple of years to get going, but by his junior and senior year, he really started producing for us. He had that little baby hook going in the paint. He became a much better defensive player. I would say he's probably the second best center. I would put him slightly over Kafani. I think they're a good 2A, 2B behind Walker. But I'm getting my big guy in Brady there. So I'm at Micah, Dion, Austin, and Brady. So Mark, will go back to you at number 11.
Yeah, so this is why you take the center early, so that then other guys have to overdraft centers. and then you get a guy like George Pappas to fall to you in the 4th round. And I'm thinking, okay, I got Walker inside at center, Shavar my playmaker, Dion Hammond on one corner, George Pappas on the other corner. You can't help off of either of those guys because they're both going to knock it down. Love Pappas's competitive spirit. He's a guy I think we'll hear from that he's not happy that he fell to the middle of the 4th round.
No, he won't be.
But I'm happy that he did. So, you know, I think George Pappas is a 3rd round, maybe fringe 2nd round talent that I got in the 4th round. So really pumped to have George and pair him with Shavar and Walker again and add them with Dion Hammond. The offensive explosion from that core 4 is unrivaled right now.
All right, Mike, how are you going to top that?
So my priority now, right? We've got our alpha point guard. Okay. We have a shooting guard on the wing who he's kicking it out to on the drive, who's going to make every single 3 he takes. We've got a guy, if he does miss a 3, he's going to clean up a glass and put it back. Now, once we've got our auto bucket there, who's playing defense? That guy won't play in defense is Marcus McLaren. I know I said that Ray is probably one of my personal favorites. I think Marcus McLaren is a 1A here, is one of my favorite Monmouth basketball players. The way he plays the game, complete lockdown defender. He blossomed into a real scoring threat over the course of his 4-year career at Monmouth. Became another clutch shot maker, had a buzzer beater this year for a great team that ended up winning 20 games. Even this year, he became a highlight waiting to happen. We had several plays his senior season that ended up being Sports Center type of plays where it was a fast break, just thunderous slam or a block or whatever it was. He became the type of guy that not only could play defense, could get a block and a rebound, but would make a an oh my God type of play that, that brought the house down. So really putting together a team here that could play you could see playing together on the floor. And this is a grown man's team at this point. Okay, so we have Pierre Sarr now, who's going to be another forward for us. He's playing the four, okay, and he's one of the most talented players, I believe, that King Rice has ever recruited. Coming out of Roselle Catholic, you can see a theme here. This is players who can clean up the glass. They can make shots. They could all put the ball on the floor. And this is, I know Mark said there's no such thing as positionless basketball, but I think this roster begs to differ. They could all play anywhere.
Yeah, I just meant when you're talking about people devaluing the role of a center. That's my problem with positionless.
I'm just playing.
Hey, but you know what though? Now I'm going to contradict myself because I started looking at my roster here and I'm like, all right, I got Miller center, I got Reynolds point guard, 2 wings. Shavar's a great defender, but I had 3 other guys who were more offensive based. So then I started looking at my 4 position, and I needed a guy who was going to bring energy, who was going to play defense, who was going to get those loose balls and kind of galvanize things with that energy and that spirit. And I decided to go with Malik Martin here, who had a fantastic last season with Monmouth, and then obviously grad transferred up to Drexel in the Colonial after that. But wish he stayed his 5th year at Monmouth without a doubt. Loved to see how much he grew in his time at Monmouth. Remember, he started his college career as a 17-year-old college freshman. And by the time we started to see that finished product, he was a winner. And he really just totally fit what I needed here. To be honest with you, after I took Pappas, I was hoping that either McClary or Martin would be here for me so that I could run that press and trap with my undersized 4, who also can, make some big shots and, really just support with energy, effort, and defense my core 4 that I took before that.
All right. So after that, I have 15 and 16 at the turn. I went with a little bit of a throwback, not all the way back, but towards the beginning of the King Rice era. I went with Andrew Nicholas. This kid, before the recency bias comes out, this is the guy that was the shooter for Monmouth. This was the Pappas back then. He lit it up from 3 all over the court. Pappas was probably a little more athletic than he was, but Andrew could knock it down for the best of them. If I have Austin Tillman creating and I put Micah Dion and Andrew on the wings, a lot can happen out there. A lot of damage is going to happen. Kid was over my house all the time. He could tell you himself he could shoot. I was roommates with a guy that we'll talk about a little bit later that I got sniped on. But Red was an awesome shooter for us, and I think that gives me some firepower there. And then I go with some toughness with Jarvis Vaughn. My recency bias comes in a little bit here, but Jarvis last year was starting to turn into the player that we recruited. He's finally healthy for most of the year. The kid was banging threes. He was blocking shots, playing defense, diving for loose balls. This was not the player we saw the first 2 years he was injured. This is the kid we got out of Virginia, who was the state player of the year in Virginia. I think he brings a lot of toughness to this team, brings rebounding. He'll knock somebody on their ass if he has to, like we saw all season long, kind of the enforcer in the paint. So I think him and Brady next to each other gives me a formidable front court there. So we'll go back to you, Mark, at number 17 for a throwback.
Yeah, so I took Malik Martin for some defense, and I said, all right, my 6th man. So I'm going back 10 years. I'm going back to the absolute beginning of the King Rice era. Give me Jesse Steele. Give me a guy who can create, who can shoot the ball extremely well, who is a blur. He's a little undersized on defense, but we're really worried about outscoring people on my roster here, and love to have him who, Mike talks about these players and their pedigree. Jesse Steele played at Oak Hill Academy in high school. So, when you're talking about big time pedigree, that's who he was. And his story, there were some twists and turns, and he ended up I got three guys on this roster who started out as walk-ons in Miller and Reynolds, Pappas, and Steele. I got four guys who started out their college career as walk-ons and all earned scholarships. Love that chip on the shoulder. Love to have Jesse off the bench.
Mike?
Going with Colin Stewart. We've got a starting five. Why not have the ultimate sixth man? And for my money, the ultimate sixth man as a Monmouth basketball fan was a microwave bucket, could bust his own with, a barrage of threes, a backdoor cut for an alley-oop. I mean, lost count of how many times he changed the direction of a Monmouth game or had an emphatic play that sent the other team scrambling for a timeout. I think one of the more notable of those plays is his own personal, I think it was 12 run against Iona in that classic 110-102 game. Remember that? I'll never forget that one. And another one that I was at in person was when we played Rutgers and we were putting it on them. And I think Justin threw him a lob pass, and it felt like we were at the Ocean First Bank Center at the rack. That was, they were scrambling for a timeout. Those types of plays are what Colin Stewart, brought to a basketball game. You get him off the bench, doesn't matter if he's, if he's even played at all in that game yet, he's going to come out there and he's going to make his mark on a basketball game. So now I have the first pick in the 7th round as well. I've got my starting five rounded out, or I've got my point guard, my 2 guard. I've got a 3, a 4, a 5. Now I'm looking at somebody who's going to sub and play some defense, because this is a team that is going to get up and down the floor. They're going to play hard. They really have that DNA that we've seen from the King Rice teams, where as they get started out and when they're playing their best, it's because they're getting stops that go into fast break offense. And in a blur, you can be up on a team. You could be taking a 3-point deficit and turning it into a 20-point lead. And the key to those defensive stops is players like Josh James, the defensive stalwart from the 2015 through 2017 teams, who could absolutely score. Right? When you hear the coaches and the players talk about what kind of player Josh James was, he was absolutely a guy who could score. And even King Rice will say that he recruited him probably to be the scoring point guard. And what the team needed as the players grew was different, and he took a more defensive role on that roster. And there's no question that Monmouth doesn't win 55 games in 2 years if Josh James doesn't make that type of decision to be that defense first guard. And he could still score even on those teams. There was plenty of plays where he would make a huge defensive stop and then go run the floor and finish a fast break. So he had a lot of offensive acumen too and can score. This is a team that plays 2 ways, can really get up and down the floor. And this is an extremely versatile and tough roster. I'm really confident that my guys so far could beat Mark and Ryan's guys.
Colin Stewart, 12-0 run, and King Rice blows kisses to the Iona fans.
So I start looking at my roster now, and I'm like, all right, I got my little scoring spark off the bench in a guard and Jesse Steele. And then I start thinking, well, how can I get an advantage on my opponents again? So because I'm not overly convinced that Kofani or Brady alone could hold off Walker Miller. So then I decide, hey, I'm going to take a guy that was all MAC 3rd team as a senior. I'm going to take Diego Quinn here. So Diego Quinn, who was always uber efficient with his shot percentage from the field and was a good back to the basket scorer, turned into a very good back to the basket scorer as a senior. Figure, hey, if we're running things through Walker Miller with our offense, Walker Miller can't play 40 minutes a game. All right, he's a 7-footer. Well, we're going to throw another big body in there, Diego Quinn, and we're just going to wear down the opposing centers on Mike and Ryan's team. And again, when you have 2 back to the basket, efficient, all MAC type bigs, it opens everything up for everybody else. So we're using that model and we're going with it. Diego Quinn is really going to be huge for our second unit.
I just hope when we do this vote that Mark is surprised by the percentage. Mark's probably going to win the vote, but I just hope it's like a percentage where it's not like 95% Mark and like 3% Ryan and 2% Mike. I hope it's a little bit closer, and the fans help us out a little bit here. So 21 and 22, the 7th and 8th round turn. I'm going with Louis Polari at the 7th. You get defense, you get 3-point shooting, you get great drives to the basket, you get toughness. I thought King Rice was probably harder on him than most players in this era. I felt like he took him out of the game way too many times over one mistake. Some guys were out there a lot, and he seemed to make one mistake, especially his last couple of years, and King Rice would hook him. And I didn't feel like it was fair, but I feel like talent-wise, Louis Polari was another very underrated player for us. He can handle the point a little bit. He'll hit some threes. He'll play defense. Great bench guy to have, first guard off the bench. And then my second pick, I went with Miles Foster, right? We'll go recency bias here, but the kid's a bucket. I mean, every time this kid touches the ball within 6 or 7 feet, the ball goes in. I mean, his shooting percentage within the paint, it's got to be close to 70, 80% because you see him just back guys down. He pulls that little spin move, goes over his right shoulder, and just banks it every single time, and it just goes in every time. So if I can get that kind of scoring for a kid that is in better shape his sophomore year to freshman year, so much better shape, and he's even better shape now looking at him over the summer. The kid is a rising star, and I think he's a dark horse to be an all colonial, like 13 type of guy this year, if he can keep producing and continue to get into better shape. Miles Foster is a weapon off the bench. Not a huge guy, but he can hold his own on defense and definitely get me buckets down low.
So I'm about to draft another guy from 10 years ago, going with Deion Naismith. And you're talking about a guy who handles himself well in the Colonial. So if you're not sold on the fact that Deion Naismith played at Monmouth in the NEC, just know that then he transferred to Hofstra for 2 years, and he averaged double digits both of his years at Hofstra, where the first year at Hofstra, he ran the point. At Monmouth, he was more of a 2. The second year at Hofstra, he played the 2. He's bulldog mentality on defense. He actually started his college career as a quarterback at Northeastern, and then they folded the football program. So then he transferred to Monmouth to come play basketball. Tough Jersey kid. Probably could start. If people really knew what he did when he got to Hofstra versus what he did the first couple of years at Monmouth, because his game really jumped up multiple levels. He's kind of, in a way, it's a little bit of a cheap pick because I'm really picking him, based more on what he did once he left Monmouth. But love having him. He could play a little 2, a little 1, and hey, he was a big time player in the CAA, which we can't say about anybody on this draft board yet, or anyone who's ever worn a Monmouth uniform yet.
That's a good point. So that brings us to the last pick of the 8th round. I'm very defense heavy, and I'm going to stay very defense heavy. Miles Ruth.
Heaters.
Miles Ruth is my pick. He's my past meets present pick in this draft. Yet another team first guy. When you look at Miles Ruth's career so far, he's a starting point guard as a freshman on a team that ends up sharing a league title. Takes a backseat to Shavar Reynolds when he transfers in, and puts the team's priorities over his own. Comes off the bench and creates mayhem for the other team. Still plays extremely hard. Still ends up being a reliable player for Monmouth. And not only can he lock down the other guards, but he's also a pretty clutch shot maker in his own right, and he's made plenty of huge free throws in his career so far. So really, he on this roster, he's coming in at the under 12, at the under 8 for Ray. He's going to come in, he's going to drive, right? He'll get to the free throw line. He's not afraid to get fouled, and he'll create chaos. He'll he'll trap, he'll cause 5-second calls. He's gonna make life hell for the other team. And this is a tough roster. So I'm really excited about this pick. I'm starting to fill out some depth here. And like these guys said, this ranking is really thinking about, as we talk about our experiences watching, some of our favorite Monmouth players, like, if we go back and say, imagine if that guy played with that guy. That's really what this is. And this next pick that I'm going to make is really going to take some fans back to the beginning of the King Rice days with Tyrone O'Gara. Okay, he was another one of those forwards that can play. This is becoming a punchline, but positionless basketball. He can make all the plays. He could put the ball on the floor. Kind of like around the same time that Brice Kofani was starting to make a mark. Tyrone O'Gara was a little bit before that, and these were really the King Rice teams that started to push the limits of what they could do physically as they were transitioning from the NEC to the MAC and really pushing the pace. Really, really physical teams. When you'd watch them in practice, these guys were getting after it. And I was a Monmouth student at the time when Tyrone O'Gara was on the roster, and I remember how hard these guys played. On this roster, he's playing as kind of that slasher role along with Brice Kofani and Pierre Sarr. He's wing driving, pick and rolling, getting putback slams. I remember Tyrone O'Gara was on SportsCenter a couple of times, if I remember right, during some of those games early, those bye games. I think some of the Villanova and Notre Dames that didn't go the way we wanted, but in some of those games we got our pound of flesh because guys like this set the foundation for how Monmouth was going to play into the future. So really, I'm looking at this roster too, and it's cool because you have a lot of different eras, and you're kind of like blending it together. It's kind of making a cool picture of kind of the last 10 to 12 years of Monmouth basketball.
So Mike has gone on about how tough and how chaotic and how defensive oriented his roster is, and Ryan's talked about the edge that a Jarvis Vaughn gives his roster and the toughness of Deion Jones, Austin Tillman. I'm going to draft here the toughest, most chaotic, hardest working, and probably biggest annoyance to the opposing team of the King Rice era. And I think Ryan was weeping as I typed this one out. Taking my guy Max DeLeo here to totally change everything with the scope of my roster. My roster up until that point, Diego Quinn's a little bit of a bruiser. Malik Martin's a defensive guy. Deion Naismith was a tough guy as a football player, but Max is the guy that you could bring in and totally slow down somebody's, star wing that gets going. So yeah, Deion Hammond, George Pappas, they're going to score in double figures for me. They're going to hit a bunch of threes, but if some guy is getting off and I need to bring somebody in to lock them up, this is a game changer for me in the 9th round. Totally change the outlook of a game, totally change the outlook of a championship game, a season. Max, among my top 10 favorite Monmouth players of all time. So pumped to have him here in the 9th round.
I'm sorry, Max. I thought I could wait one more pick and I had you. My roommate senior year. I'm sorry, buddy. Thought I had you there. Yeah.
He devalued you. That's the thing with these drafts, right? You have to value the players and the assets that you really need on your team.
I could have taken him over Miles Foster, but Miles just scores too much. Sorry. Damn it. So I'm going to counter, and you're going to call me crazy here. I'm going to counter your Walker Miller dominating on the inside with a guy that's a lot smaller than him, but a lot tougher in my opinion. And that's Ed Waite. This is a way throwback. I think he only played 1, maybe 2 years for King Rice. I think just 1. I think it was his first year. But this guy was a 6'4", 6'5" power forward. Very undersized guy out of Florida, I believe. He didn't look 6'4". This guy played like he was 6'9", 6'10". He bullied guys that were 5, 6, 7 inches bigger than he was. Scored at will in the paint. Decent mid-range shooter. Didn't have a 3-point ball, but for a guy that you see on the roster as a 6'4" forward, and you saw his rebounding numbers and his scoring in the paint numbers, like, wow, how they got to get that wrong. The guy had to have a typo. It's got to be a 9 instead of a 4. There was no way the guy's 6'4". So he was very tough. I could definitely see him coming off the bench and trying to bully Walker around a little bit and try to get into his head a little bit and give him some elbows. But I think Ed Waite was definitely the pick there. And then I went back-to-back forwards. I went Nikkei Ruddy, a guy that improved dramatically his junior and senior year. He became a kid that was kind of just off the bench and, got his rebounds, got his blocks, played tough. And then his last couple of years, especially his senior year, when he actually got to play power forward, his natural position, you saw him flying all over the court, and you saw a much more confident player. So I'm drafting senior year Nikkei Ruddy. If you're drafting Deion Naismith from Hofstra, I'm drafting senior year Nikkei Ruddy because he was a beast all year. Not the biggest scorer on the team, but with all the weapons on the outside, he's going to be open in the middle for one of those huge dunks here and there. So I'm happy taking Ruddy at 28 there.
And then I'm going to go back to the time of Ed Waite and Jesse Steele. I'm going to take Mike Myers-Kit here. 6'8", long, rangy combo forward. My thinking here is that he could do a lot of the things that Malik Martin does. So as a 10th round, filling out my second unit where I can run Steele at the point, Naismith and DeLeo on the wings, Diego Quinn as the center, and Myers-Kit as my undersized 4-man running my press and traps and chaos. And don't sleep on him. He led a Monmouth team in points per game at one time. So
he was solid.
Yeah. So you know what? He's he fits the mold of what I want in Malik Martin. Probably not as tough as Malik Martin was, but if we're running press and trap and we want to play a small ball 4, he's going to be my guy off the bench.
Back to you, Mike.
Seems defense. Nick Rutherford is a fast break scoring threat coming off the bench with Miles Ruth. At this point, the other team's guards are struggling to get up and down the floor because they're gassed. We're trapped all over the place. And this team, when Nick Rutherford was on this team, one of the things that stood out to me was when they struggled early in that non-conference season. I believe I'm struggling to remember which year that was. Drawing a blank, but when they started 0-12 and they got that win at Penn, I remember it's one of the games that Nick Rutherford kind of took over defensively, and you remember seeing the emotion after that game, how much that meant to this team, and then they turned it around and ended up making a run all the way to the MAC championship game. And Nick Rutherford was a big part of that success. I know we were kind of bummed when he ended up transferring out because we thought he could have made even more of an impact in another year for Monmouth. But I mean, he was a great player. Continues his defensive theme, and is kind of pulling together all the pieces of a King Rice roster. This next pick is a great one in my opinion. This is Greg Nowak, right? A lot of Monmouth fans remember him from the bench mob and being on the sideline. But when Greg was a freshman in 2013, he could really play. He made a lot of impact plays in the beginning of his career. Didn't have a gaudy stat line, but you could tell that he was going to be a player that could blossom. Unfortunately and sadly, he had some injuries that we didn't get to see that manifest the way we wanted to, but Greg could play. And we were talking about what we've seen from these guys as far as their level of talent, and obviously this is all a fun hypothetical anyway. So if we say what if these guys had done everything they could have, this would have been a great addition to this roster. He's rounding out that front court too, right? He's playing down there with coming off the bench with Breeze Kofani and Tyrone O'Garo and really rounding out that front court.
So then I start looking at my roster here and I'm thinking, well, what if I run into a team that's playing a big four and I can't play Quinn and Miller together, and Malik's undersized. Myers Kit might have been 6'7", 6'8", but he's probably about 175 pounds. So I went with Mustafa Traore here. And when you're looking at the 11th and the 12th round picks, when I'm thinking about roster flexibility and the ability that if Walker Miller, say, got hurt, then Quinn's starting at center, Traore's my backup center. If Malik Martin got hurt, Mustafa Traore might end up being my starting four. Or if, Myers Kit, it was a bad matchup with a big four man, I used Traore right away. So, Traore was one of the guys I was looking at in this spot. I would have loved to have had Ed Waite in this spot as well. I was a huge fan of his or Nikkei Ruddy, but very happy with all the roster flexibility Mustafa Traore gives me here in the 11th round.
Yeah, I think Stoff was a steal there. I was looking at him a couple rounds earlier, actually. I think he could have went around the Rutherford Myers Kit range over there. I thought he could have been a few picks earlier. I was looking at him and I chose Waite and Ruddy instead. I had them slightly ranked over him, but Stoff's a great pick in the 11th round. I don't want to give you any credit tonight because you're boasting, but I do got to give you that one. So my last two picks, I do need a little bit more speed at point guard and some ball handling. I'm going with Sam Chapu. We start getting a little bit thin with kind of our options now because we used a lot of players from the era. There's not many we're leaving out. So Sam Chapu
got a vote for first overall pick on Facebook. So whoever that is might vote for you as the winner of this draft.
I don't know who that was from, but
there you go. You got one vote, Ryan.
Sam, listen, we know he didn't have a good MAC tournament to finish up his career, and it was disappointing. But he did have a very solid career at Monmouth. He was a speedy guy. He finished at the basket well. And, his offense always disappointed me a little bit because I saw the three ball. You saw flashes, even his freshman, sophomore year. And I said this on a podcast. You saw flashes of Justin where he made these crazy plays around the basket. And you're like, wow, like that looked like a Justin play right there. And then it didn't quite turn out that way. His offense kind of stuttered at times, but he was a very good floor general, perfect backup point guard for this type of league. I would take him as my backup point guard any day. So I think that's a solid pick at 33. And then I'm going at 34 with Austin Tillotson. He was a guy from King Rice's first year, lit it up, played very well as a starter for King Rice. I don't think he got quite the time he deserved or quite the attention he deserves. He was a Callaway recruit, but he was very, very solid for Monmouth. And he went on to, I believe, Colgate, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Was it Colgate?
Yeah. Averaged like 16 a game his senior year. He was going to be my pick. Now looking at the draft board, I totally messed up. I should have taken him thinking that you wouldn't have taken Traore because you just took three power forwards in a row with Foster, Waite, and Ruddy, and then I could have taken Stoff on the turn. Was not happy to see you make this selection.
Yeah, Tillotson was solid. He had a great career after Monmouth. He's a guy you wish you could have held on to. But I'm definitely happy with Austin and Sam rounding out my backcourt and my squad. So finishing out my squad, Micah Dion, Austin Tillman, Brady, Red Nicholas, Jarvis, Louis, Miles Foster, Ed Waite, Ruddy, Sam, and Tillotson. I'm definitely happy with my group. I don't know if I'll win the fan vote, but I was definitely happy for the third pick, the last pick. Definitely happy with how things turned out in the end. So, Mark, give us your last pick.
So with my last pick, this one probably isn't going to be popular with the fans, but I figured I'm going to die on this sword, I guess. And I just looked at my roster, and I only have two guys. I guess Naismith could play a little point too, but I just worry if Shavar or Jesse Steele were to go down, and I needed an extra lead guard. And I just started, when you start looking at the names and who's left, that the best talent available is Donovan Totley. So he's my 12th man. You know what? He's there. It's an X factor. He was the best talent available in this spot. Would have been Tillotson for me if I didn't mess up with my drafting, and then Traore would have been here. But because I went Traore and Tillotson was gone, took Totley. And hey, you know what? When you're looking, like I said, with Traore and Totley at the end here, you're looking for roster flexibility and to really cover yourself if you have an injury. Some guys down with COVID protocols, academic probation. You never know what could happen with these rosters. So that's why we got a guy like Totley there in our back pocket, a guy who can jump in any game and score 20. So,
all right. So Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick of the draft.
So Mr. Irrelevant is actually Mr. Relevant for Monmouth basketball on this draft. He's putting the emphatic stamp on this team's attitude and swagger, and that's Mr. Dan Polari, right? Everybody's favorite Dan Polari. This team is showing up to the game. It knows it's going to win, and it's going to tell you all about it. Greg and Dan are rounding out the bench mob on this team, and they're keeping the whole squad locked in. They're letting them know how good they are, and that they're gonna win every game they play. This was so much fun, putting together these teams, and it really was cool because you see 3 full recruiting classes, like we said before, of players. A bunch of them did get to play together, but a bunch of them, you think about how cool it would have been to see, and this is really neat, and I love doing this.
You know what I have to say? I know that the Mets just did it recently, but I think Monmouth should have an old timers game before a game this year, where they have some alumni who are physically fit still come back and play in an old timers game. And if you need people to split those teams and get them out there all set up, you got 3 guys here who know what they're doing. But get the year of whoever is in promotions. I think an old timers game with former Monmouth players would be really, really awesome. As like you got a 7:00 game or something. You do the old timers game maybe 5:30 to 6. A little quick 2 10-minute halves. We get to see them out there. Would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think the fans would vote for us to be the coaches of those teams. I think it would be like Kevin Hart coaching against Mike Golick or Selena Gomez or somebody in the celebrity game. But I don't think King Rice would. But that's for another. Maybe our fans would vote for us to be the coaches there. But yeah, I mean, I think we probably had some snubs out there. We picked 36 guys. We picked a lot of guys. Some of the snubs I was kind of considering towards the end. Zach Tillman played 5 years, so he got left off. Marcus Ware, big forward back in the day. Steve Spinella only came for a year or 2. Big Phil Waite, 7'1", clogging up the middle. Christian White had a nice couple of years at Monmouth. And then after that, you get a lot of guys that either transferred after a year or didn't play a whole lot. Maybe Gary Cox in there, but for the most part,
Will Campbell was close to being drafted for me.
And then you have a few guys in the current team that either aren't developed yet or haven't really played. So for the most part, I feel like the 5 of those guys were the only possible snubs, and everybody else, I think we pretty much got on there. So now the fans, it's up to you. All right, you got to vote. Tell us who your favorite team is out of the 3. Mark is pretty confident in who is going to win this one, but Mike and I have different feelings. But yeah, we're going to put a fan vote up. It's It's Tuesday night now. So I'm going to post this Wednesday morning, and we'll put a poll up with the rosters and the YouTube page, and we'll see what you guys think. All right. This was a lot of fun for us. It was an idea we had last year that we never really got to, and finally we were able to do it, which I'm pretty pumped about. I'm looking forward to seeing Ray and George and Red Nicholas and Justin just kind of sitting back and laughing at all of this. I think Justin's going to tell us we're out of our minds for certain picks, but I'm kind of looking forward to hopefully the players chiming in and telling us we're crazy or we're on the right track. So either way, this was fun, and we got to come up with some more ideas like this in the future during the summer.
I say we came up with a pretty good idea with this and the Old Timers Day. Say that two really good ideas for August pertaining to Monmouth basketball is pretty strong from us. Can't wait to have November roll around and see what our team's looking like, and check out the CAA for the first time. Best of luck to the football team starting in 2 days, right, Mike? Thursday night.
Thursday night's the night. They're playing at New Hampshire, and then their first home game is the following Saturday at home against Fordham.
So there you go. The CAA era is off to a rolling start with the soccer teams. I know they're both off to really great starts. We always like to try to shout out the different Monmouth sports that are excelling, when we get a chance. Thanks everybody for listening, and make sure you vote for my team. It's the best.
Don't listen to that garbage. Vote who you want to vote for. All right. Thanks everybody for listening, and have a great night.